At first glance, it looked like a routine late-night bit, the kind you half-watch while scrolling your phone, one hand on the remote, half paying attention. But then Jim Carrey flipped a switch, and suddenly the studio was not a studio anymore. It was something closer to a controlled explosion with a live audience sitting inside it. Jimmy Kimmel had stopped holding back his punchlines. Donald Trump had become the undeniable center of a roast that kept escalating past every point where anyone expected it to stop. And the wildest part was not even what happened on that stage. It was what happened after, when the clips hit the internet and took on a life that nobody in that building had planned for. This is exactly how it all went down. People walked into that studio expecting the usual rhythm. The late-night format has its own comfortable predictability. Clever jokes, controlled hits, laughter that flows easily and does not leave anyone feeling like they just witnessed something they will need to process later. The stage was set, the audience was settled, the opening segment rolled out with its normal pacing, and everything on the surface suggested a standard night. Nothing about the first few minutes indicated that by the time the show ended, the segment would be circulating on every major platform and drawing responses from people who had not even been watching. Then Jim Carrey walked out, and the atmosphere changed before he said a single word. There is a specific quality to the presence Jim Carrey carries into a room, something that communicates immediately and without subtlety that whatever the plan was for the next few minutes, the plan has been revised. He has never been an entertainer who performs within boundaries. His entire career has been built on the principle that boundaries are suggestions, and that the most interesting territory always exists slightly past the point where a safer performer would have stopped. When he locks onto a subject, he does not approach it from the outside. He inhabits it, stretches it, bends it past recognition, and then holds it there long enough for the audience to see things in it they had not previously noticed. And that night, the subject he locked onto was Donald Trump. Not a light version of Donald Trump, not a gentle impersonation designed to get a laugh and move on. A full, committed, no visible exit version of Trump delivered with the kind of physical intensity that makes people in the front rows instinctively lean back slightly, not out of fear, but out of the instinctive recognition that something large and fast-moving is heading in their direction. Kimmel, for his part, did something that was in its own way equally notable. He stopped managing the room. Late-night hosts are, by professional necessity, managers. They control pacing. They guide the conversation toward predetermined destinations. They keep the energy calibrated so that nothing gets too far ahead of the audience's ability to process it. It is a skill that looks effortless from the outside because the best practitioners make management invisible. You never see the structure because the structure is working. But that night, Kimmel stepped back from the controls in a visible way. He matched Carrey's energy rather than containing it. He added precision where Carrey was adding chaos, grounded commentary where Carrey was adding exaggeration, and structure just sufficient to keep things from completely unraveling. But he was not redirecting, he was riding the same wave. Together, they created a rhythm that kept pushing further with each exchange, each line building on the previous one, each response accelerating the momentum rather than releasing it. The audience could feel the escalation and leaned into it, their laughter feeding back into the performance, which fed back into the audience, which fed back into the performance, the loop tightening with every cycle. Trump, as a subject, has always worked in late-night television for a specific reason that has nothing to do with political orientation. He provides material that practically structures itself. The public statements, the documented contradictions, the moments that need no exaggeration to sound exaggerated, all of it sits on the surface of the public record waiting to be picked up and examined. Kimmel has spent years demonstrating this principle, taking Trump's own words and setting them into a context where the words do the work without editorial enhancement. The tax return material is a good example. The calculation was simple. Take the amount you paid in taxes this year. Subtract from it the amount Donald Trump paid in taxes. The result is zero. The line did not require a punchline because the setup was the punchline. The audience understood immediately because the math was real, the record was public, and the gap between what the number implied and what anyone watching had paid in April was visceral and immediate. Carrey brought a different instrument to the same material. Where Kimmel works with precision and timing, Carrey works with distortion. He takes the existing shape of a thing and stretches it until the original form becomes visible in a new way. The way an exaggerated caricature can be more recognizable than a photograph because it amplifies the defining characteristics past the point of subtlety. When he stepped into the heightened version of Trump he had built, it was not simply an impersonation. It was a funhouse mirror version of a public performance that was, in the original, already operating at a significant distance from conventional behavior. Stretching something that already starts stretched produces a result that is both comic and strangely clarifying. The audience laughed, but the laughter had a recognition inside it. The kind of recognition that makes you laugh and then sit with it for a moment afterward. The Robert Kennedy Jr. material operated in a different register entirely. The raccoon incident, for those who needed a reminder, was documented in Kennedy's own personal diaries. Not a rumor, not a political hit, but a first-person written account in which he described removing a dead raccoon from a roadside, transporting it, and performing a specific set of actions with it in the presence of his children. Kimmel had noted, with complete sincerity, that there was a time in this country when a misspelled word ended a political career. Dan Quayle, one word. The career of a sitting vice president measurably altered by a single spelling error on a school visit. He offered no further editorial comment on what the comparison implied about the distance between that standard and the one currently applied to public officials. The audience supplied the conclusion themselves. Carrey treated the Kennedy material with the specific enthusiasm he reserves for things that feel almost too strange to be real, but demonstrably are real. The baculum research, the J-shaped bone, the scientific ambitions Kennedy had expressed regarding roadkill specimens. None of it required elaboration, because elaboration would have been redundant. The facts were already operating at a level of absurdity that satire can only gesture toward. Carrey gestured toward it with considerable enthusiasm, which was all the gesture the material required. Between the comedy, something else was happening that the audience and the clips would only partially capture. Carrey, in the quieter moments between the performances, was speaking with a directness that stripped the comedic frame away. The administration described as a rabid dog turning the country upside down. The observation that something had happened to people who had become politically radicalized, that whatever the cause was, the effect was visible and specific. People he described as having gone crazy in ways that seemed genuinely distressing to him. He was not performing concern, he was expressing it. The distinction is visible in the pacing, in the absence of the usual comedic punctuation, in the way he spoke about generations growing up, learning that lying is acceptable, that hating half the country is the correct orientation, that fake news is a phrase children now use casually. He was careful to separate the policy from the people who voted for it. You can make a bad decision about a candidate, and it does not define you, he said. It does not make you stupid or different or worthless. He could break bread with anyone who voted for Trump. He loved the people of this country. He loved the heartland. What he could not extend that warmth to was the choice itself, which he had decided was demonstrably wrong in ways that had become obvious enough to name directly. Kimmel had his own version of the same argument, framed in his more structured, analytical register. The tax returns comparison, the Hannibal Lecter immigration policy, the AI Jesus portraits, the press secretary being asked about the Pope's brother, Louis, and whether the Pope understood the importance of Louis being MAGA all the way. He treated each of these as data points in an ongoing demonstration of a single thesis, that the gap between the official presentation of events and the reality visible to anyone paying attention had grown to a size that required active effort to ignore. Not passive inattention, active, deliberate effort. The Pope material was particularly rich because it contained its own perfect comedy architecture. Trump had posted on Truth Social that Pope Leo was weak on crime, which Kimmel noted had required him to take a break from reading 6 words in, because the statement was too surprising to process without a pause. The full post had contained the additional argument that Leo had only been selected as Pope because the Church believed an American Pope would be the most effective diplomatic tool for managing the American president, and that without Trump's presence in the White House, Leo would not be in the Vatican. Kimmel received this argument with the measured tone of someone who is genuinely unsure which direction to approach it from, and ultimately decides that quoting it directly is sufficient. The AI image discussion had its own layer. Trump had posted an image of himself generated by artificial intelligence in which he appeared as Jesus, or in a version of the image, alongside Jesus, during promotional material for his No Tax on Tips initiative. Kimmel had examined the hands in the image carefully, noting that they had the specific wrongness that AI hands have, fingers not resolving into the correct arrangement. He had also observed, with the detached tone of a man making a factual observation, that someone in the image generation process had applied specific aesthetic enhancements to the jawline and cheekbones. Someone, he said, had been look-smaxing. The word arrived in the context of an AI Jesus image posted as promotional material for a tax policy initiative. It landed correctly. What made the entire evening work as something more than a collection of individual jokes was the cumulative effect of all of it placed in sequence. The tax returns, the Hannibal Lecter border policy, the Pope's brother Louis, the raccoon baculum, the AI Jesus portrait, the Howard Stern comments, the triumphal arch proposal. Each individual item, taken alone, produces a reaction. Taken together, in sequence, each building on the previous, they produce something closer to an argument. The argument does not need to be stated explicitly because the sequencing does the stating. The audience assembles it themselves from the provided materials, which is both more effective and more entertaining than having it handed to them. When the clips hit the internet, the response divided along the lines, these things always divide. Supporters of the comedic approach celebrated the boldness, the willingness to push past the comfortable territory into the places that actually matter. Critics questioned the proportionality, the line between satire that serves a purpose and performance that simply escalates for the sake of escalation. Both conversations happened simultaneously across every available platform, and both conversations generated more attention for the original material, which generated more clips, which generated more conversation, which generated more attention, the loop continuing past the point where any individual involved in the original segment could track it. Carrey appeared unfazed by the division, which was consistent with his position. He had not treated the performance as a political calculation designed to produce a specific response. He had treated it as an expression of something he was genuinely feeling, and the genuine quality of it was visible in the moments when the comedy dropped away and he was simply speaking directly. The outrage carpet bombing of current media culture, as he described it, was something he was caught up in as completely as anyone. He was angry, he was caught up in it. The art he had been producing reflected that. The paintings that displayed Trump as a variety of figures, including the Wizard of Oz surrounded by his flying monkeys. He was not performing outrage at one remove. He was inside it, trying to process it through the tools available to him. Kimmel, by contrast, operates in the mode of the chronicler. He documents, he collects the public record week after week, assembles it into a coherent narrative, and presents it back to an audience that already knows the material but benefits from seeing it organized. His role is not to create the story, but to make the story visible in the specific way that late-night television makes things visible, through timing and juxtaposition and the particular clarity that comes from saying out loud what everyone has been privately observing. When he noted that Trump had paid the same amount in federal income tax that year as the number you get when you subtract any number from itself, he was not making an argument. He was reading the public record at the correct speed, with the correct pause afterward. Together, they occupied the specific territory where entertainment and accountability overlap, the space where a joke about taxes is also a statement about fairness, where an impression of a president is also an analysis of how that president presents himself, where a segment that begins as comedy gradually reveals itself to be something with more weight than either participant planned to put in it. The story that began in a studio did not end there. It ended, to the extent that it ended, in every comment thread and shared clip and response post and counter-response and analysis and counter-analysis that followed it outward from the original source. Modern late-night content does not have a contained life anymore. It starts in a studio and moves immediately into a global conversation where viewers do not receive the meaning passively, but actively reshape it, argue about it, apply their own context, and send it further than any broadcast signal could reach. And somewhere in all of that, Donald Trump, who understands the mechanics of attention, as well as anyone alive, weighed in, as he always does, because not responding to something like this is a form of losing, and losing is not a posture he tolerates. His response arrived the way his responses always arrive, matching the intensity of what prompted it, turning the original moment into the beginning of an exchange rather than the end of a story, which is the thing about late-night satire when it works at this level. It does not end the conversation, it starts one, and the conversation it starts takes on a shape that nobody who started it fully controls. The clips spread and the reactions accumulate, and the thing that was a comedy segment for 30 minutes in a New York studio becomes something that people who never watched the original broadcast have opinions about, based on the version of it they encountered 17 shares removed from the source. Jim Carrey and Jimmy Kimmel started something that night that outlasted the show by a significant margin. They started it without intending for it to go this far, but they also did not seem particularly surprised that it did.